Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to talk to the audience or if I'm going to talk to you, Dr. Francine, but I'd like to welcome you to this interview and thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. Congratulations on your award of honorary membership for SEPM. And we'd love to talk to you and get some of your feedback about your career in the geosciences and what you expect to see in the future.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, Ariel, thanks for taking the time to do this, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Same to you. I've heard great things from my advisor. I'm here at Western Michigan University working in geochemistry, and Dr. Steve Kazmarek says great things about you. So I was very much looking forward to doing this interview.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, so I guess we'll jump right in. So the first thing we'd like to know from you is, can you give us, in about 5 minutes or less, kind of summarize like how you got to the geosciences, how you got to be where you were at the beginning of your career and where you are now?
Well, it was pretty straightforward, but when I was growing up in Northern Illinois, I had no clue what geology was. I grew up in a small farm community, so the education system was pretty limited, including in any earth scientists or sciences. So I always had an interest in the outdoors, fascinated by mountains, just their majestic nature, not necessarily curious about how they formed. So I had that going for me, and I always dreamed of going into meteorology and chasing tornadoes, but and then I also was fascinated by astronomy, but honestly, geology just sounded as boring as it could be. So I finally graduated high school and moved out and started going to college, and was in my junior year at the University of Wisconsin in Madison as a business major. And I had to take some more science credits, so I relented. There was this geology course, and so I just relented and I said, I'm going to just take it to see what it's about. And it was one of those things that it was magical, because I walked into that class and I was fortunate enough to have Lloyd Pray, a very famous carbonate geologist, as the instructor. And that guy was a character, and he was charismatic, and he was excited about every aspect of geology, and he translated that to the students so well. And so I think I was halfway into the semester, somewhere around there, and I was just smitten. And I remember at some point walking out of the classroom, and that was in the day where you had to use a payphone. And I remember walking out there. I called up my dad and I said, "Dad, I think I want to change majors." And he said, "I think you should go for it if that's what you really want to do." And so that's what I did. And Lloyd ended up being my master's advisor and also my PhD advisor. And so that was it. And then after I graduated with my PhD, I came here to Kansas, University of Kansas, and that's where I've been ever since. So pretty straightforward, but nonetheless, a real shock. The last thing I expected was geology to be the field I'd go into, but I'm thankful it happened.
It is quite a jump to go from your business major to jump into geology, but the rocks, they just kind of make us fall in love. That's just kind of what they do.
Well, yeah, they did, and it's really interesting because it's one of those fields where you're in the classroom and you're studying all the time and taking tests, but then the reality is out there, outside, outdoors. And it's quite a humbling experience when you try to transfer all that class learning to the reality of what's facing you. And it's daunting, but that's been my passion ever since, is trying to read the rocks.
And nature is messy. I mean, you can look at a perfect hand sample all day long, and then you go into the field and you're like, ah!
Well, and You're right. And along those lines there's these classic areas. Like I did my master's in the Guadalupe Mountain National Park,
Mhm.
and that's one of the shrines in geology for carbonates as well as siliciclastics. But even after all these years of many studies, we're still learning new things in areas like that. And I've been going to my field area in the Miocene, Pliocene in Spain for 40 years, and we're still learning new stuff. So it's really humbling.
For sure, definitely. Okay. Well, so I guess that leads into that's your education, how you got into it. So let's talk about your career a little bit. What is it about your career? Obviously, you've been to Spain. You've said over 40 years you've been going there. What are you most proud of? What's the thing that you've accomplished in your career that you just like, woo me, yay, it was me.
Well, I can answer, I guess that takes a couple answers, because there's some where it's more internal about me as trying to, advance and learn and figure out the geology and what I'm doing professionally as well. And so you're always having these internal questions that you're trying and challenges that you're learning about and you're learning about yourself and your abilities. And so I think all along the way there's these little milestones or these challenges that I was able to come up against and push through. And so there's, personal pride in a lot of those. And two specific ones are really at the beginning of the career. And this follows up with what I was telling you about coming out of the classroom and trying to uh, apply that to the rocks. And so really my master's and PhD projects really are two that I'm really proud of. And the master's was my first exposure to doing a project on my own. And it just so happened it was in the Guadalupe Mountains on the cliffs of the Western Escarpment. And so here I was, green in my first project scientifically and trying to figure out the geology. But then I had these sheer cliffs for 1,000 to 1,500 feet that I had to navigate every day. So I'd have to, camped, had to bring in all our water and all our food supplies and had to go over the cliffs, climb down, try to survive. Then once you've physically exhausted, you have to start actually paying attention to the geology. And so that really taught me a lot about myself and, pushing through these extreme challenges. And I was extremely proud that survived, number one, and then actually uh, had a project that was really pretty cool. And so that was one that I always am proud of as a first project. And then I was presented some challenges in Spain as well in terms of mapping the geology, and it just had a lot to do with the quality of the topographic maps and changes in the maps, and so trying to figure that out. And of course, you're just always wondering, am I anywhere on this map where I should be? And then years later, decades later, we took that geologic map and draped it over a DEM model, sophisticated DEM model, and that map was pretty much spot on.
Wow.
And so, believe it or not, after all this time, those are two things that I'm extremely proud of. The other part, personally, that is, now the other part of this is that at this end of my career, I've interacted with so many people and had so many students. And what was so important for me was Lloyd really took me under his wing. And we talked not only about geology, but everything. And he got to know me. And he was one that realized that you can't separate out life from work, and it all goes together. And that taught me such an important lesson, is to really kind of take those things that I appreciated and try to bring them forward. And so after all these years, I'm really happy with all the students and early career people, especially that I've interacted with and been able to, hopefully help them in positive ways and especially see them go on to their successful careers and that's really, I think, the most satisfying thing that I've seen, and it's made me, well, I've always felt this way. It's about helping others, and I take a lot of pride in hopefully having positive impact on that.
Well, I'm sure you have for sure. It sounds like you're very invested in the young scientists and the people that you interact with, and really giving back into the community. And I think that's great. And I think you're so onto it when you talk about work-life balance and understanding that what we do and what we're interested in is so involved also in our everyday lives. And you really can't just put a hard line and say, no, 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 that's not involved. So I think that's very true. I guess our next question is kind of related to what we've already talked about. You've had challenges that you're very proud of moving past and conquering. Have you ever had any setbacks that made you really kind of question and then turned out to be valuable experiences outside of those two that you already mentioned?
Absolutely, all along the way. And it was part of that journey of where you're self-evaluating what you're doing. Are you capable? Should you go other directions? And I think all along the way, you're faced with challenges, some big, some small. But it's a process of learning. And then you have to make decisions as to, are you going to change paths or are you going to try to push through? And so that, and even today, I find that there's always challenges and new things, and you're always learning, and you have setbacks, but can you get up and go forward? And so I would say all along, that's just part of the process. And your path either goes forward or changes direction as a result of it.
That makes perfect sense, for sure. If you could go back in time, maybe to the beginning of your career or to any specific place, would you do something different now, like kind of knowing what you know?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess we can always go back and say, what would I change? And I think if we really thought about it, say, well, if I change that, maybe. But the way I look at it now is, I first look at it as, where am I now, and am I happy about where I'm at? And if I am happy, which I am, I say, hey, look, I really have enjoyed the journey. I've really am happy with how my life has turned out. And then I say no, because everything that happened prior to that was part of my path to this point. And so I'm very happy, and I'm afraid if I changed one of those setbacks or challenges, I may have been an accountant in some firm someplace. So no, I don't want to change anything.
Perfect. Then that's great. That's the best thing you can say about a life, right? A life well lived, and it makes you the colorful and great person you are today.
Yeah, and exactly what's the cliche? You make mistakes, but you have to learn from them, and that's what we're always going to do.
We're never going to learn anything unless we make some mistakes. So if we're not going to change time, so we talked about how valuable it is to have that work-life balance and to know that work isn't separate from our home life. How did you manage that? How did you manage to maintain your life and your work-life balance? Was that very integrated? I mean,
yeah, it's variable, and it's evolved through time, but it's always started with, my mindset was work hard, play hard. And so, okay, what does that mean? And again, it changed with time, but the reality is try to focus on both, because they're both important aspects of a life. So the trick is to, when you've got work to do, focus on that. And then when you're taking time off, focus on that and try not to think of one or the other. And also I looked at it as a reward system. I thought, well, if I take time to really work hard and accomplish something, I'm going to feel good about that, and that'll help me relax and say, hey, I deserve some time off. And so I played little games like that, as achieving goals in both. And so if I took time off, I realized that I was going to be much more productive because I was feeling good about that and I was ready to come back. And so that to me is you've got to schedule both. And so then as a single person, well, that was kind of easier to do. But then when you have others involved in your life, family, then that philosophy is good, but it comes down to a lot of communication, because there are going to be times where you have to really work hard, but then that communication is, hey, we're going to schedule something so that, when this is done, then we're going to do this. You can do that on, larger time frames as well as, huge vacations or whatever, but you can do it also on daily or whatever. But that communication becomes important, because then expectations are the same on both sides. And then other thing in my job, I had freedom so that I would travel a lot to conferences and go do field work. And so then we looked for creative ways to combine both. So we could go to a conference and it'd be in an interesting place. And then after the conference was done, we'd hang out for, extra time and go enjoy things. But the point is that you have to be willing to evaluate that and realize that will evolve through life. But the other thing that I tell people, I found for myself, and I always talk to my students about it, is because, you can get caught up in the rat race. And one of the things you have to do is self-evaluate. How do you work best as an individual? And I found that burnout, is a real thing that can happen. And so everybody has to pay attention to that and realize that some time off is going to make you much more productive in the long run. And so I've talked to the young career and the students and have encouraged them to pay attention to that and make sure, because if I see them sitting in their office working and burning the midnight oil and they're just spinning wheels, then what's the point? Whereas if you take some time off and then come back, you may be twice as productive in the long run. So it's a challenge because it's easy to get caught up in things, but you have to really schedule it in, and everybody has to self-evaluate what's best in terms of how they're going to produce on both the sides of that.
I think that that's very telling when you talk about being able to self-evaluate, and I think we could all do a little bit more of that. It's very easy in our society to work very, very hard, and you have this idea that you must always be at work, and that is the thing that makes you the best. And I think sometimes we don't stop to think about the fact that that does not necessarily make us our best selves, and it's not our most productive self. I think also it's very important, like you say, to have deadlines in your own mind and communicate those and then commit to it. Don't just start the next project because, like, oh, you're excited about it, like commit. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, how many times have you been at work and you wish you were doing something else to enjoy yourself? And then when you're enjoying yourself, you're thinking, I should be at work. And so we all do that. And then the self-realization is, well, I got to fix that so that I can focus on, what I should be doing. And to do that is you've got to find the right mix so that you're satisfied and fulfilled with both.
Yes, for sure. I agree. And what skills besides your grit, which your true grit in climbing the Guadalupes and surviving,
Surviving.
surviving as a backpacker, my first trip in the mountains alone, I totally get it. Surviving is an accomplishment.
Well,
Besides that grit, is there anything, any skills, foundational things that you learned that you would say to geoscientists, like, you guys really kind of need these things? They were super helpful in my career.
yeah. Yeah, well, yes, just to follow up on that Guadalupe Mountain thing and survival, the surviving it. My brother was my field assistant at the time, and he had a huge fall, and it was not good, but he survived it. So survivability in that project was really key, and fortunately he made it through, and he's okay, and we tell that story a lot.
Question, was it
Anyway,
your younger brother or your older brother?
well, he was young, and so he didn't know. We both didn't know any better to be out there. So
Mhm.
anyway, yeah, the skills. Boy, I'll tell you, it starts with having been fortunate to go to a school that you got uh, a great foundation in the fundamentals in the geosciences as well as the sciences. And throughout my career, that has paid benefits. And, you know, if you have that solid foundation, I find that you can adapt to different projects or even jobs, as long as you have that. And I think even, you know, through today, that is something we have to pay attention to is in your training. You know, you can have all this other, you know, the technology advancing and all of this stuff that looks, you know, produces incredible data and looks good, but we have to be able to have that foundation of, you know, ground truthing with the real geology and understanding the earth as an earth system. So I guess that's where I start with, and that has been a staple throughout my career. I think the other thing that really is I viewed this as continuing education. So I learned about other subdisciplines, geophysics, geochemistry, petrophysics, ecology, paleontology, enough to be dangerous, but actually learning about them enough to know how they could perhaps help me in my research and answering questions, and then getting the experts involved. And so that was something that I've been doing throughout, and you know, just that's been such a benefit because that interdisciplinary, integrative approach is so valuable. So that was something that I think if geoscientists are, you know, being aware of what's out there and how it can potentially be of use, then that's real valuable. Also, that developing the skills and valuing collaborations. And that includes finding the right people that you can work with, not only their technical skills, but making sure that's somebody that you can collaborate with and be productive with.
Excellent. Those are great tips.
The other
Jason?
one, the other thing is that we can all get really detailed in our studies, you know, collecting the data and being detailed. We have to be necessarily, you know, we've got to produce the best data. And so it takes a lot of, you know, that hard work digging into the weeds, but develop the skills. If you have them, great, but otherwise develop the skills to assimilate that data. And what does it mean in a bigger picture? Answer the so what question. Ask yourself that. And that's a skill that is so valuable because as you move through a career, when you're trying to discuss your research to others, you're going to have to, the best way to show the value is you're going to have to speak to whatever audience it is and say, why should I care, or what's the value of this? So that's a skill that is really important.
Excellent. That makes perfect sense. I think we all kind of run into that even in undergrad, even in our early graduate career. It's you ask yourself why. You learn all of these facts, and then even then you're asking yourself why, and then we can take it to the next step and we investigate, and we, as my advisor says, we go an inch wide and a mile down. But we have to
Yes.
make sure to come back. We have to be
Yeah.
able to relate that.
You know, and it can't be overestimated, the ability to communicate, both written and oral, you know, especially scientific communication and writing can be challenging. So practice, take every opportunity you can get. It would be my advice to communicate, and especially present in front of different audiences, and try to communicate to different audiences. Some are going to be more scientific, others are going to be more general. That is something that I think really will go a long way, especially as we go into the future, and trying to communicate the importance of geoscience into the issues that we're going to face more and more. We're already facing, and we got to face them more. So I can't emphasize communication enough.
I think that's really key. And I also think, just to build on that a little bit, is that there's obviously been quite a shift in the way technology has changed our communication and people's attention span. And so it's really, really important to get that 30-second hit, that like, oh, that's a TikTok, or that's a this thing or that thing, because that's the attention span you're working with to get the general public brought in and excited about your science and to understand why it's important to them. So it's a great note.
Sure. And you know that, I'll tell you what, if somebody can get really good at that, they're going to have opportunities, a lot of opportunity, because that's a valuable commodity going forward. It's always been, but now especially.
Excellent. That's a really great tip.
And also, I think the other thing is quantitative skills are huge, and they're going to get even more. And so, you know, take advantage of all the technology that allows you to be quantitative in whatever you're doing, and understand that, because if you're going forward, that's the future, is data and quantitative analysis.
Excellent. Well, speaking about going forward, we've talked about how you felt fulfilled by your work with many people throughout your career and your personal development. Do you consider success and fulfillment interchangeable? Do you feel that because you were fulfilled by certain parts of your career that you were successful, or do you measure success differently?
Yes. So yeah, they can be in certain instances comparable, but I think others they're not. So, you know, personally, again, as you go along, you have things that you're trying to overcome and that you're struggling with, and all of a sudden you do it, you figure it out. And so that's a personal success. And at the same time, that can be very fulfilling. And but on the outside, you know, nobody else would look at that and necessarily say, well, that was a success. So it really depends on who's defining success. And if you individually are using something as success that's fulfilling at the same time, then you know that they can be equal. Certainly, there can be external measures of success that can be fulfilling, but I don't think always that's necessarily the case. For instance, if somebody pats you on the back and says, thanks, that was really successful what you did, it may have been something that you had to do, and you're going to get maybe something for doing that but it was not fulfilling. It was something that somebody else defined that said, well, this is going to be a measure of success for you. Internally, you may say, okay, great, but it wasn't fulfilling in that sense. And certainly, in the rat race where you're having to be promoted, find jobs, get a degree, you're going to reach those milestones, hopefully, but are they going to be fulfilling? Maybe briefly they're fulfilling, but then all of a sudden you're on the treadmill again, and it's the next thing, and it's the next thing, and it's the next thing. And so sometimes that can be addictive and not necessarily, there's an adrenaline rush when you reach a milestone that somebody else has defined for you, but it may be fulfilling for the short term, but then in the long term, it kind of is fleeting, and then you got to go on to the next thing. So really, I think fulfillment is what you want to find overall. And one of the things that I'm fulfilled by that nobody necessarily would be measuring it as a success on the outside is if I've helped somebody. And that's some of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. And nobody but that person and myself may know about it. And so that's a success to me, and it's also fulfilling.
Makes sense to me. Would you say that kind of helps you go through those days where you maybe don't want to go to work? Do you have this overarching sense of why you're doing it, like how you're going to be fulfilled by your work and how you're going to feel success from one day to the next? Or do you sometimes still have those days of, oh, I really don't want to go to work today. I really don't want to do that.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I didn't.
It's kind of a trick question.
I honestly, I think, I think that's more the norm than isn't the norm. One thing that I quickly learned was, I thought geology is I was going to be studying rocks and doing research, 100% of the time. And you quickly learn that isn't the case. And you've got things that you're going to have to do out of necessity, and you just have to do them, and you have to battle through it. So if I come up to where I know I'm for a week or a day or whatever, that day's or that week's filled with stuff I'm not really excited about, yeah, well, all right, I'm not looking forward to that. But then I take a bigger picture and realize that almost anything we do includes stuff we like and don't like. And the trick is, what percentage of it is it stuff that you really, really enjoy versus what you don't enjoy? And that's the key, I think, is if most of the time you're really happy with what you do, then that's a success. And, if you're doing stuff that is not enjoyable a lot of the time, then maybe you have to do something else.
Do you find that you frame those moments where you have to maybe sit down and just do grant writing, or you need to do this thing that it's not necessarily your favorite? Do you have a method for kind of spinning that to yourself in a positive way to make that an enjoyable activity, something that you can, instead of dreading it, you can think, oh, I've got these positive things? Do you have any recommendations for people who are maybe struggling with that?
Yeah, I don't have that trick of necessarily being able to convince myself it might be something enjoyable. What I try to do is, at times I have to just, for instance, if I have to write something, I have to write a report or whatever, I have to maybe give myself a little bit of time to digest it and get used to the fact that, well, I got to do it, and then try to say, well, what can I do progress-wise to get this going? And it may be little baby steps that finally get me over a hump to where now I'm not necessarily happy to do it, but I'm over the hump of being able to say, okay, now I can focus on this and do it. So there's little mind games you have to play at times.
Makes perfect sense. Excellent. Thank you. So let's move on then. We're going to talk about the future of geoscience and society. So that's another topic that we'd like to discuss, because obviously geosciences and society, we sometimes hit some loggerheads. There's some miscommunication, or people who are picking like the most splashy headlines that maybe don't have as much behind them as we might hope, or things get spun in different ways. In your opinion, how has that changed? How has the geosciences field changed over the years? How do you see geoscience and research evolving in the coming years?
Boy, I hate to date myself here, but there's been a lot of change since I first came out. And let's just say during my master's thesis, I was typing that on a typewriter. So we've seen, yeah. Anyway, so obviously it's the explosion of the computers, and especially your own desktop computers, and just the technologies in general. It's just been this exponential increase for data and analyses, and certainly the internet just changed everything, and that basically shrunk the world in so many ways. And now all of a sudden you could, the speed of communication and just the sharing of information, the time frame for that was just almost instantaneous. And so information was all coming out from everywhere and could formulate collaborations just like that. And honestly, to watch this, that title of the film was Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think. And that's kind of what this feels like. It's, so how do you assimilate that? And what we're faced with is you have to be able to pick through a lot of stuff, but it's opened up so many doors, but it's also created issues because people expect things now. And so I've noticed that in the past, we maybe had the luxury to actually think about things a little bit when we were trying to figure out our research. And now it's sort of, I don't have time to read papers because I've got to, I'm on the run all the time. So that I've seen, that's really, really changed things. Social media, you brought up social media, and I think that that's good and bad. And you mentioned the time spans have shortened, but also we're dealing with sources of information, and what's real and what isn't, and how do we evaluate. There's a lot of that has come out too. So I've seen that, and I think what I've been worried about seeing is these trends to where, peer review process is kind of, being shoved aside at times by certain groups of people. And so anyway, those are things that I think have both been helpful, but have also had some negative times toward it. The other part of this is moving forward. And I think we all realize that we're in this period of evolution and transition to where we're going to have to, the geoscience is going to go through some revolution. And we're more than ever going to have to look at it as Earth system science. And we're going to have to broaden geosciences into the other disciplines that surround it. And we're going to have to look at the Earth systems as a whole. And we're going to have to link to other subdisciplines that we don't traditionally, social sciences, political sciences. We're going to have to develop closer collaborations with the engineering, and boy, you just name it. There's all kinds of evolution that's got to take place. The education system. we're currently evaluating, changing some of the curricula to not get rid of the basics, but also to start training towards these climate and the environment and the energy issues and the sustainability. And, geosciences has got to be at the front of that. So yeah, we've got a lot to do with that. I think both good and bad are the evolution of artificial intelligence and machine learning. That has some great benefit, but at the same time, my goodness, we've got to keep track of, my favorite term is, we got to have the ground truth. We've got to make sure that we're training our geoscientists to not only be able to use those technologies, but to evaluate them, interrogate them, and make sure that we're not getting enamored with results that may not be, grounded. And geoscience education, I touched on that, but we've got to do a better job of training geoscientists to address these emerging issues, including in the communication of those. And we've also got to retrain people that are out there in the professional worlds now. We've got to, and some of the industry, oil and gas industry is already, doing some of that retraining of their staff. So this to me is, going to be some of the things that I can see evolving rapidly.
Those all sound like really good notes. Thank you for that. I think that kind of you've covered some of the things that we were interested in talking about, which is kind of, we're talking about all of these changes, and we're talking about the things that have happened since you began your career. We're talking about the impact of geoscience and the research and practices. We're talking about kind of how it's impacted human sustainability. How do you feel like some of these things that have developed over your career, how do you think that they've positively or negatively impacted human sustainability? And like, what do you think we could do better to reach non-geoscientists? What would you suggest?
Well, I think we look at this maybe from defining the sustainability, and I think we've been focused on sustaining society. And so we've always done pretty good with that and focused on that in terms of geohazards, assessing and mitigating. Certainly water has, we've done a lot with water, I think, in the geosciences related with water. Environmental work, that remediation. We've been good at society, making sure infrastructures and urban considerations and that involve the geosciences are helping society. And then certainly in energy and in oil and gas, coal, that sort of stuff. That was, that's societal, important in sustaining society, and so as well as industrial mineral mining. And certainly, now we're in a period where we're looking at sustainability not from just society. We still want to focus on society, but now that includes, well, wait a minute, we've hurt ourselves with what we've been doing in the past. We've created problems. And so now sustainability is not just focusing on making sure society is sustainable from how we defined it before, maybe a little bit more, but now we've got to sustain the planet along with society, because we're kind of in trouble in some areas. So we've now got to pay attention to sustaining the environment and climate and mitigating some of these issues. So now sustainability is defined a little bit different to encompass all that. So now we're rethinking about, well, how are we going to sustain society, but do it in a place where we can not continue to adversely affect, as well as actually starting to mitigate. So this is really posing challenges, and this is why the geosciences have to necessarily go through rapid evolution to be able to address these. And geosciences are well poised to do this. We're trained to handle a lot of this, and so we've got to make sure that we're part of the front of the spear attacking these issues. So looking forward, I think we have to increasingly with climate, we have to be able to foresee how climate's changing. It's changing, and how do we deal with the geohazards that are associated with that? And we're going to change locations of populations, and resources, water. How are we dealing with all of these? So we're still going to have to, focus on water is going to be huge, obviously. So some of these things with geohazards, water, all that will continue even more importantly. Industrial minerals will be huge. They're going to be, urban sprawl is going to be huge. And how we're going to deal with that for providing resources that are economical, and do it to where we're doing it in a much more environmentally friendly way is going to be a big issue that geoscientists need to get more involved than they have been previously. It's an engineering dominated industry, and I hope geosciences can get into it more. But a lot of us now think about sustainability in terms of the energy as well, and so that's a big focus right now, because we've got all these greenhouse gases that we're emitting, and so the focus now is on, well, sustainability, yes, but now we've got to do clean energy and renewable, to where we're not impacting the environment or the climate as much. And so that's where we need to go. And so we're going to go in those directions, and hopefully rapidly, as rapidly as we can. So we've always had hydroelectric, now solar and electric, the solar panels, the wind, electric vehicles, hydrogen, those are on the table as, the future energy sources. And so we've got to go towards those directions, absolutely. But we're in a transition period, and we've got a lot to address with that. And certainly, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. This is a great way. I was kind of thinking while you were talking about that. So I hear what you're saying about these things that we need, and the direction of geosciences. So what do you think that young scientists can do to help their career opportunities in this new landscape that we're looking at? So, what kind of challenges are they going to have to securing jobs, and, what areas should they consider? Should we maybe consider a different space, different career opportunities that are getting a little more attention, and kind of what the key skills are that you think?
Yeah, I think that we're going to see continued growth in geoscientist positions. I know that we see that geoscience enrollments has decreased, and I think that's partly because there's been a disconnect as to the relevance of geosciences towards important issues. For better or for worse, we may be looked at negatively associated with energy perceptions and realities, actually. So we haven't done a good job of advertising, and I think we have to go through that. But I think the future is looking really bright for the geoscience positions. And So I think it's all going to be in lockstep as we evolve towards these renewable resources, and also that we're going to see that we need to continue to be involved in these jobs, traditional jobs of the geohazards in the water and the environment. I've seen estimates that show that into the 30s, there should be a 5% increase in jobs. And I've even seen some estimates on a national level of 35% increase. Now, I've been involved in some of these before in terms of trying to look into the future, and they can vary, but I think when we look at the landscape here, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for people. And so I look at it in terms of, well, there's going to be continued use of oil and gas. We're going to be in that realm, certainly, for sure, into the near future, as foreseeable future, I should say. But we're also seeing associated with that CO2 sequestration is really important now. And, there's a lot of emphasis on that. And for all the climate models, the climate mitigation models I've seen, carbon capture and storage is a big part of it. And if you think of the skill sets, the people that have been trained in the basic geosciences and have been in industry, in the energy industry, it's the same tool set. You're just changing the focus a little bit. Also, critical minerals. That's exploding area. We need the critical minerals for solar, for wind turbines. We need it for the batteries. And so stepped up efforts in those areas are going to be huge. I think also I would recommend, students, again, same things I said before, the getting up to speed in all the new technology and quantitative, but also recognizing that there's going to be opportunities in sub-disciplines that may have an association, but weren't necessarily the traditional ones. Again, we're looking at societal issues. We're looking at urban development. So you've got local government, you've got city planners, you've got, state and federal government. Communication is going to be huge. Political science, I would recommend that people would look at not necessarily minoring in other things, maybe, but certainly having their eyes and ears open, becoming aware of what's going on now and where the opportunities may rise, and also pay attention to your interests. We all have multiple interests, and look at how you're happy with geoscience, but maybe there's something else that you really enjoy that can be something that will apply to a new field that's opening up. We're going to need geoscientists that know something about social science. We're going to need social scientists that need to know something about geoscience, and it can go on and on and on. I don't have a crystal ball, but my feeling is that there's going to be growing opportunities for geoscientists.
I think your experience grants you at least somewhat of a crystal ball. So we'll definitely take that into consideration. So I guess that kind of leaves us, do you think that there's any specific steps, not just in the education, but in the job market, and how geoscientists, especially early career geoscientists, market themselves to employers and to job opportunities? I know you said do presentations, practice presentations, every chance you can get out there, work on your communication. Do you think things are like internships are one of your best bets? Do you have a feeling about that?
Yeah, I do. I do think as you move forward, people want to give themselves an extra step up. Mm-hmm. And so getting a job is you got to treat it like work. You've got to work at getting a job, and you've got to figure out how you're going to get that step up. I would look at the evolving landscape of where the jobs are going to develop and where your interests lie, and that you should have hands-on experience in whatever fashion that is, so that when people look at you, you just haven't, had the classroom experience, but you're having hands-on experience. So that can be internships, research projects. You may find you're at a school where there's some interaction between a geoscientist and somebody over in another department, engineering or some other related field. Get involved in that crossover discipline. Get your experience in as much as you can in other technologies, so that you can show that you've got a range of experience that you can apply to jobs. You should focus on the fundamentals, because what I've noticed is those fundamentals are transferable. So when somebody's looking at your record and they see that you've got the basics, I've seen this time and time again. If you're too specialized and you don't have the basics, you've kind of put yourself in a box. But time and time again, I've noticed where people have been trained at an excellent place with the basics in science and the basics in the geoscience, that goes a long way for being transferable. And also work at knowing who your audience is that you want to open up a door to, and know the people where you're interviewing. Practice, 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 and know names. Know a lot about it, so that you can walk into the place and show that you're an expert. Show leadership skills. Take advantage of any opportunity you have to demonstrate leadership.
Excellent. I sense an overall theme from you: diversify and manage yourself and be self-aware and know what you're looking for and prepare yourself for success. Don't just expect success to drop in your lap.
Absolutely.
Very much so.
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
you can't spread yourself too thin and know everything about everything, but certain broadening the experience to me has opened up so much. And I've seen that for students too. They might have had experience in doing a certain software package that was applicable to a certain industry, and that hadn't been done by most students or in other places, and it caught a company's eye and said, "You've got experience in that software." It's like, oh my goodness. And next thing you know, that gave them a leg up.
Mm-hmm. Something to differentiate yourself from the crowd, for sure. Well, in closing, we're running right up to our clock here.
Okay.
For your career, with the trajectory that you see with geosciences and where you are with your career now, what do you want to get involved in? What would you like to work on going forward?
Yeah, I think at this stage, at this late stage of my career, I'm really focused on keeping my fingers involved in some research that I think is important, interesting, but also I think I'm more focused now on mentoring and trying to use my experience to give examples, and also to show I love leading field trips, and we've led field trips there where we try to show how that applies to the real world situations. And I think those field trips are just as relevant for the emerging issues, the current and emerging issues. And so I hope I can continue to do that, I guess teaching and educating, to show the importance of the fundamentals, to always ground truth with the reality of the earth as we move forward in all this technology explosion that we experience. I think that's what I want to focus on.
That sounds fantastic. Well, you've definitely contributed a lot to the geosciences, and you've earned this SEPM Honorary Award for sure, and we really appreciate you taking the time. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. This has been a great opportunity.
Yeah, you too, Ariel. It was really nice to get to know you a little bit. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And enjoy your award. I think you're going to get like a great plaque and stuff too. You can put it up on your shelf and yeah, enjoy it going forward. Maybe put a crystal ball next to it. So as
Yeah,
we
there
watch
you go.
going forward. So yes, thank you very much for your time. And I guess we'll conclude.
Okay, thanks, Ariel.